"You don't belong here." The words hit like a punch to the face, stopping the entire Manhattan gym cold. The sound of gloves hitting heavy bags fell silent. All eyes turned to the black girl in torn sneakers and a faded duffel as if she'd trespassed into forbidden territory. Celeste Hart, lightweight champion. Social media superstar with 3 million followers, raised her phone and started live streaming. "Hey everyone, look who just walked in. A janitor who thinks this is a community gym?" Hearts exploded across the screen. Comments flooded in, "Kick her out. Queen, put her in her place." Have you ever been laughed at by an entire room just because you were poorer than them? Because you didn't look like them? What would you do? Run away? Or stand your ground? Amara Lewis didn't run. She set her bag down and said, "3 rounds. I just need 3 minutes to survive." The room froze. No one laughed anymore. They thought this would be entertainment, a quick, easy, viral clip, but they didn't know. The woman they were live streaming, mocking, once had a name in Jamaica, a name that made whole gangs go silent, a name Manhattan was about to learn the hardest way: hurricane. If you've ever been underestimated because of your skin or where you came from, hit like, share, and subscribe, because this story will make you see boxing and arrogance in a way you never have before. So what really happened that afternoon? The gym sat on the 12th floor of a Manhattan glass tower, its walls covered with portraits of champions, its cardio soundtrack silenced for cold, mocking laughter. And through the blinding light reflecting off polished mirrors, a girl walked in, carrying borrowed gloves and a storm waiting to break. It was the start of an afternoon no one in that room would ever forget. Amara Lewis pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The smell of floor polish, the thud of dropped weights, and the half-finished thump of workout music wrapped around her. In front of her was an expensive slice of Manhattan walls covered in gleaming mirrors, glove racks displayed like jewelry cases, hardwood floors so polished it seemed no poor foot had ever touched them. The sound of her worn-out sneakers scuffed against that floor like an intruder's knock. The first to notice her was Celeste Hart. The lightweight champion stood in the center of the room, her hands wrapped in white tape like strands of war silk, her high ponytail perfectly in place. Celeste's eyes scanned Amara from the faded canvas duffel clutched against her chest to the fraying threads on her sweatpants. Then she smiled, thin and sharp as a blade. "Look at that," she said, her voice pitched high and clear so the entire gym could hear. "The night shift janitor must think this is a community center." A ripple of snickers spread. Someone let out a low whistle. The pounding on heavy bags stopped. Jump ropes fell silent. Movement in the room felt stretched thin. Heads turned toward Amara like they were witnessing someone trespass onto sacred ground, someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Amara felt those stares pressing against her skin, cold and heavy as stone. She stood still, breathing deep, spine straight. This wasn't the first time she'd been looked at like that, but the way Celeste spoke like she was a stain on a spotless floor made the air itself suffocating. And Amara knew, in that moment, that if she left now, they would remember her only as a joke. Celeste didn't stop at the insult. She pulled a gleaming phone from her gym bag, opened an app, and raised it high like she was starting a familiar performance. "Hey, fam," she said, her smile wide and camera ready. "Here's the new face of boxing. Isn't she adorable?" Hearts burst on the screen. Comments poured in. "Kick her out. Queen. Show her who the real champ is." The laughter, now laced with cheering, only fed the arrogance burning hotter in Celeste. She glanced around to make sure every eye was on her, then turned back to the camera, speaking like a ring announcer. "You're gonna love this. I'll give this girl a chance to prove herself. If she can last 3 rounds, she can stay. If not, well, she knows where the door is." The crowd erupted, clapping like they were at a circus that had just announced its next act. Amara didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't look at the camera or the faces hungry for a spectacle. She looked only at Celeste. Amara's dark eyes weren't afraid. They weren't angry. They were still, like the surface of a deep lake but beneath them. Celeste sensed a current she couldn't name. The silence made the room uneasy. They waited for a reaction, an apology, a retreat, but none came. And in Amara's gaze, Celeste suddenly felt something she hadn't expected. A challenge. The room seemed to freeze. Everyone expected Amara to back away, mumble an apology, and leave like so many others who had been cornered. Instead, she bent down, set the faded canvas bag on the floor, and straightened. Her narrow shoulders stood like pillars. "I just need 3 minutes to survive." The words weren't loud. They weren't fiery. They were soft, like wind, but when they hit the ears in that room, they landed like a hammer on steel. A few people laughed. The laughter spread like an oil slick. Celeste threw her head back and laughed, angling the camera to make sure her audience caught it all. 3 minutes easy. She sneered. "I'll give you all 3. And by the end, you'll wish you'd never stepped in here." The crowd roared again. Sneakers pounded the floor. Someone clapped like they were egging on a street performance. But in the noise, one person didn't laugh. Coach Ray Mendoza stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Amara's every move. Ray had trained champions, had seen the bravest walk into and out of the ring. But what he saw now was unlike anything he'd witnessed. It wasn't recklessness from someone too foolish to fear. It wasn't the swagger of someone desperate to prove themselves. It was a quiet, unshakable fire. A fire no one in this room could put out. Ray knew, even before the first punch was thrown, that they were about to witness something far beyond a performance. Amara hadn't just accepted the challenge. She had declared war. The night before the fight. Amara lay on the creaky top bunk in her tiny Bronx room, eyes wide open, staring at the cracked ceiling. The city's soundtrack blaring car horns, music spilling from the corner bar, an argument echoing in the hallway blended into a familiar, melancholy hum. She didn't sleep. She didn't even try. Because every time she closed her eyes, Kingston came alive again, as if she had never left. The narrow, mud-soaked alleys, the patchwork tin-roofed homes, the damp air clinging to her skin. She saw herself at 8 years old, fists clenched, standing in a circle of children chanting her name. It wasn't a game. It was survival. Every punch she landed meant a few coins enough for a small bag of rice or a little bread for her mother and younger brother. Every loss meant going to bed hungry. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, hoarse with worry. "Don't let the world turn you into an animal." Amara. But Amara had always known the unspoken truth that world left her no choice. To survive. Sometimes you had to become something scarier than hunger. She remembered the cold, rainy nights, knees pulled to her chest in a dark room, hands still bleeding from fights, yet smiling when she saw her mother split the meager bowl of rice in half for her brother. It was there, in the shadows of Kingston, that Amara learned to fight, not to win, not to be famous, but to stay alive. And now, in a different city, in a different life, she needed that instinct again. New York at night wasn't like anywhere else. It was bright, alive, but to Amara. It was a city of hunched backs and averted eyes on subway rides. She worked night shifts in a midtown office building, a place that sparkled by day but turned cold and hollow when it was just her and a cleaning cart packed with supplies. The meager pay barely covered the $300 a month for her slice of a bed in a crowded Bronx apartment, shared with 3 women she barely knew. Sometimes, after work, Amara stood on the building's rooftop, staring out at the glowing windows of luxury condos in the distance, wondering if her life would ever brush against that world. But then she shook her head. She hadn't come to New York to dream. She came for one very specific chance, the single scholarship the prestigious gym promised an escape from nights spent scrubbing floors. She'd thought that if she was good enough, patient enough, she could trade sweat for a different future. But that day, in the gleaming gym, her hope was twisted into a punchline, turned into entertainment for millions watching a live stream. The mocking comments, the laughter, the contemptuous stares. They weren't seeing a fighter chasing an opportunity. They saw a fool who didn't know her place. Amara clenched her fists. Her hope had been insulted, but it hadn't been extinguished. And if today was her only chance to keep it alive, she'd pay any price. The locker room was small and empty, filled only with the steady drip of a leaky faucet and the familiar blend of sweat and disinfectant. Amara sat on a wooden bench, head down, retying her laces. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't fidgeting. She prepared quietly, like it was a ritual she'd done 100 times. Ray Mendoza leaned against the doorway, silently watching. In 30 years of coaching, he'd seen it all: people training to escape something, people chasing fame, people lying to themselves that a little courage could make them champions. But in Amara, he saw something else. He stepped closer, his eyes landing on her compact hands as they pulled the laces tight. The skin on her knuckles was thick and dark, calluses that couldn't belong to a beginner. "You fought?" before he asked, not as a question, but as a statement. Amara didn't look up, didn't answer. Just a faint smile flashed across her face there and gone like a spark in the dark. Her silence told him more than words ever could. Ray stepped back, folding his arms, a shiver creeping up his spine. This girl wasn't like the reckless amateur Celeste loved to humiliate for sport. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't puffed up with bravado. She was still solid, like a rock hidden beneath the surface of the water. And in that moment, Ray understood. This wasn't a cat-and-mouse fight. This was a storm coiled tight, waiting to break. And Celeste, with all her confidence, had just opened the door and invited the hurricane in. The gym door swung open with a dry, cracking sound, letting in a draft of cold air that sliced through the already taut atmosphere. Conversation stopped. Laughter died. Even the background music stuttered into silence. A man walked in, dark-skinned, broad-shouldered, built like he'd been carved out of hard years and heavier burdens. His face bore deep scars, not just from fists, but from a life that had never pulled its punches. Amara froze. Her breath caught in her chest, her heart hammering. "Uncle Malik." The words slipped out barely above a whisper, as if meant only for herself. The man turned, his eyes aged but sharp, flickering between surprise and reproach. Malik Lewis, the uncle she hadn't seen in 10 years, the man who had disappeared from family dinners, from holiday gatherings, from the memories she'd worked so hard to bury. To Amara, he was a ghost from Kingston, a remnant of a childhood soaked in sweat and blood, a past she'd sworn she'd left behind. He paused at the doorway, scanning the pristine Manhattan gym before landing his gaze on her, like he was looking at a warrior who had wandered into enemy territory. Malik didn't speak right away, but his stare rooted Amara where she stood. 10 years had passed, but she still recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had stood in packed fight circles, where every bout was a gamble with survival. No one in the gym knew who this man was, but to Amara, his presence dragged up memories she'd vowed never to revisit. A piece of herself she thought she'd buried now standing right in front of her. Malik didn't approach her immediately. He watched her for a long moment, as if trying to decide if this young woman was still the niece he once knew. When she turned away, pretending to focus on rewrapping her gloves, He moved toward the corner where Ray Mendoza stood. "You the coach here?" Malik's voice was deep and rough, like sandpaper. Ray nodded. "Yeah, and you are." Malik didn't answer right away. He glanced at Amara, then leaned closer, his words low enough for only Ray to hear. They used to call her Hurricane back in Kingston. Ray's brow furrowed. "Hurricane." Malik nodded, his eyes darkening as though remembering someplace far away. She didn't fight for fun. Didn't fight to prove anything. She fought to survive. You see those calluses on her hands? Those aren't from sparring rounds with a coach and a timer. They're from the streets, from fights where losing meant no dinner and sometimes worse than that. Ray swallowed hard. He'd heard nicknames like that in the underground, names that weren't for hype, but for warning. Hurricane. A simple word, but in Kingston, it meant fear. It meant destruction. "Don't let the way she looks fool you," Malik added, his tone heavy as stone. "She's not some naive amateur chasing a dream. She knows exactly what she's doing. And if she's decided to step in that ring, nobody's stopping her." Ray stayed silent. In that moment, he knew the little show Celeste thought she'd orchestrated was about to turn into something none of them were prepared for. Across the room, Celeste Hart was still lost in her performance. Her phone, perched on a tripod, framed her face in bright white light, the high ponytail perfect, the smile curved like a mocking question mark. "All right, guys," she said sweetly, like she was sharing a beauty tip. "She's about to get an expensive lesson. Just a little match to teach her where she really belongs." Hearts and comments flooded the live stream. "Teacher, Queen show her who owns the ring." Celeste glanced at her phone, her eyes sparkling as the viewer count climbed. Everything was going according to plan. A public humiliation streamed live to millions, reinforcing her image as the untouchable queen. Celeste didn't notice Ray. Arms crossed in the corner, his eyes sharp as a man calculating the weight of a dangerous equation. She didn't notice Malik, the scarred man silently tracking Amara's every movement like someone who already knew what kind of storm she really was. To Celeste, Amara was just a broke girl stupid enough to trespass into a world that wasn't hers, a lamb that had wandered into a wolf's den. But to Ray and Malik, the picture was very different. They saw a predator, waiting, coiling, choosing her moment. Celeste turned back to the camera, oblivious. "3 rounds, she repeated with a smirk. "I'll let her last until the bell, so she never forgets her place." Ray glanced at Malik, a silent nod passed between them. They both understood. This wasn't a lesson for Amara Lewis. It was the moment Celeste Hart was about to learn what it feels like to stand in front of a hurricane. The locker room was cramped, its water-stained walls and the sharp stench of sweat mixed with disinfectant making the air heavy. Amara sat on a battered wooden bench, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the laces of her worn-out sneakers. From somewhere beyond the door came laughter, shouts, the noise of people hyping each other up in the gym. Each sound cut into her like a blade, reminding her where she was and what they thought she was. She inhaled deeply, eyes closing as she tried to slow her heart. In her head, Celeste's words still echoed sharp and clear. "Night shift janitor. Look at her. 3 rounds." Each phrase scraped across her pride like a dull knife, pulling up the rage she'd buried long ago. But Amara knew uncontrolled rage was useless. Rage had to be harnessed, reshaped into something else, something she'd learned to do long before Manhattan. "They don't see me," she whispered, her voice low and rough. "They just see a number, a statistic." It wasn't a complaint, it was an anchor, a reminder of how the world measured people like her: immigrant, laborer, black, poor, all crammed into numbers on paper, never stories worth listening to. Amara opened her eyes. They were different now, like a calm lake just before the storm breaks. Silence could be mistaken for weakness, but for her, silence was a weapon, sharper than any insult she could throw back. In that suffocating little room, a storm was forming, quiet, coiled, and waiting for its moment, and Amara knew when it hit, no one in that glossy gym would be left standing the same. The locker room door groaned open. Ray Mendoza stepped in, closing it behind him like he was sealing off the world outside. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. He'd seen people walk into fights with pride, with desperation, with delusions about proving themselves, but the girl in front of him was none of those. "Kid," Ray started, his voice slow and deliberate, like each word had been weighed before leaving his mouth. "Why take this fight? You know what she's trying to do to you." "Right." Amara lifted her head. Those deep black eyes stopped him cold. There was no trace of confusion or fear left in them, only a stillness like ice and a glint like steel. "Because people like her need to be reminded," she said evenly, "that silence doesn't mean submission." Ray leaned back slightly. The answer was simple, but it sliced clean through the space between them. He'd trained fighters at every level, from champions who couldn't be touched to reckless kids looking to get hurt, but he'd never seen eyes like hers. They weren't the eyes of someone fighting to win. They weren't the eyes of someone chasing revenge. They were the eyes of someone ready to endure pain, humiliation, even loss just to protect the one thing no one could take her dignity. Ray drew a long breath and nodded, as if he understood. In that moment, he knew this fight wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't content for social media. It was going to be something else entirely. A lesson, but not for Amara. For Celeste, and for everyone who had ever mistaken silence for weakness. Across the gym, Celeste Hart was still deep in her performance, like the whole world revolved around her lens. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hand wraps, flipping her hair, angling her phone to catch the perfect light. Her smile curved upward, sweet but dripping with malice. "This," Celeste said into the camera, voice sugar-coated but biting, "is going to be a lesson for people who don't know their place." On her screen, little hearts floated upward, drowning in a flood of live comments. "Teach her, Queen, show her who owns the ring." Celeste's eyes lit up as the viewer count climbed higher. Everything was going exactly as planned, a live-streamed humiliation to feed millions and reinforce her brand as the untouchable queen. She didn't notice the gaze watching her from the far corner. Amara leaned against the cold wall, observing quietly. No words, no expression. Just stillness, the kind of stillness that makes you forget it's hiding teeth. If Celeste was a peacock flashing her feathers for an audience, Amara was the stray cat in the shadows, patient and hungry, watching a bird too distracted to see its own death coming. Only Ray and Malik noticed the contrast. They saw every measured breath Amara took, every small shift in her body, like she was already calculating distance and timing. To Celeste, this was entertainment, a chance to humiliate a nobody and give the crowd what they wanted. To Amara, this was a battlefield, not a place for performance, but survival, and a chance to return every stare, every laugh, every word of contempt that had been thrown at her. Celeste admired her reflection, believing it to be the picture of power and dominance. But in another corner of that gym, Amara knew that mirror was about to shatter. And when it did, every piece of Celeste Hart's illusion would hit the floor with it. The bell rang sharp and decisive, like the opening note of a performance Celeste still believed she controlled. She charged immediately, her movements fast and forceful, every jab, cross, and hook thrown with the weight of someone who'd made a career out of humiliating opponents before they even knew they'd been beaten. The crowd roared. Phones shot up, Cameras flashing, live streams flooded with emojis. All eyes were on Celeste, the queen of the spectacle, the woman turning this fight into live entertainment for millions. But Amara, she didn't throw a single punch. She only moved. Each of Celeste's blows cut through nothing but air, and with every miss, Amara seemed to glide across the razor-thin line between danger and safety. Her body moved light and fluid, like gravity had no hold on her. Her footwork was rhythmic, almost like she was dancing to a drumbeat only she could hear. Celeste growled, picking up the pace, her punches turning more aggressive, but the more she swung, the more frustrated she became. Amara's expression never changed. She remained unnervingly calm, as if this wasn't a fight but a dance she'd rehearsed all her life. The noise of the gym began to fade, leaving only the two of them on the canvas, one fighter desperate to prove her power through force, and the other proving her right to exist through patience. And with every evasive step, Amara was slowly turning the board, piece by piece, in ways Celeste hadn't even noticed yet. Celeste launched a heavy right hook, strong enough to rock most opponents, but it hit nothing but air. Amara slipped left effortless, almost like a breeze, and stayed there, watching as Celeste stumbled slightly from the momentum. Laughter broke out. First a few snickers, then it spread, swelling into full-blown laughter. Celeste's face flushed not from exertion, but humiliation. She heard it. She knew exactly what it meant. The lesson she'd planned was backfiring. Phones that once pointed at her were turning toward Amara. The livestream comments shifted tone. She can't hit a ghost. Queen's getting played. Look at her, Amara's toying with her. Celeste clenched her jaw, swallowing the fury building in her chest. She knew she needed to stay composed, but every missed punch drew louder laughter, while Amara still hadn't said a single word, hadn't thrown a single strike, just kept slipping, sliding, moving to that strange, unbreakable rhythm. Every passing second on that canvas became an insult. Celeste felt like she was part of some cruel comedy, a play where the underdog wasn't the victim but the director, and the crowd was starting to understand what she refused to admit: Amara wasn't lucky. She was in control. It was a twist no one saw coming. The humiliation show Celeste built for social media had flipped, and now she was the one being laughed at. Each chuckle from the audience carved tiny cracks into the crown she'd worn for far too long. The bell signaling the final seconds of the round chimed, but Celeste didn't stop. She lunged forward with a straight punch, desperate to reclaim control. Amara only tilted her head. The fist sailed past her cheek like a passing breeze. In that sliver of distance, Amara stepped in close. She didn't hit back. She just leaned in, her voice low enough for only Celeste to hear. "You're heavy, too heavy to fly." Celeste froze for a split second, breath catching in her chest. It wasn't an insult, not the kind she was used to on the canvas. It wasn't even trash talk. It felt like a diagnosis, a truth delivered by someone who saw her more clearly than she saw herself. And the worst part, there was no malice in Amara's tone, no anger, just fact. The room erupted. Someone shouted hurricane. Another voice echoed it. Then more. Soon. The chant rolled through the gym. Hurricane, hurricane, hurricane. The nickname, once a warning, whispered in Kingston, now thundered through the polished walls of a Manhattan boxing gym. Celeste shivered. She didn't understand how one name could flip the entire room against her, but for everyone watching, it was clear. Amara wasn't just some poor immigrant who'd dared to climb the fence into their world. She was Hurricane the Storm, patient enough to wait for the right moment to rip everything apart. When the bell rang to end the round, Amara stepped back into her corner, eyes still locked on Celeste. Silent. And that silence, It weighed heavier on Celeste than any punch she'd ever taken. The bell for round 2 rang, but no one in the room thought this was a lesson anymore. The atmosphere shifted. The mocking laughter from the first round was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence of pure anticipation. Amara stepped out to the center of the ring. No more dancing feet, no more slipping through punches like water. She walked straight towards Celeste. No hesitation, no testing. Every movement now carried the weight of a decision already made. Celeste blinked at the sudden change. She brought her guard up instinctively, but Amara was already in range. A lightning-fast jab split the distance. Before Celeste could regain balance, an uppercut landed, snapping her head back, followed instantly by a right cross like a hammer crashing down. 3 punches in under 2 seconds. No warning, just impact. Celeste stumbled, feet sliding on the canvas. The solid stance of a champion shattered. Her once composed face swelled and reddened, her wide eyes flashing disbelief. She tried to fight back, throwing a heavy hook meant to end the exchange, but Amara wasn't there. She'd vanished out of range like a ghost. Celeste's swing hit nothing. Amara's fists, however, found their mark every time. She wasn't punching to finish the fight in one blow. She was dismantling Celeste piece by piece, tearing away the layers of arrogance that had shielded her for too long. Every strike said the same thing. This isn't entertainment. This is a storm. The gym erupted. No one was cheering for Celeste anymore. They were witnessing Hurricane, not the nickname, but the living, breathing force it represented, tearing through everything in her path. Celeste backed toward the ropes, each step heavier than the last, like she was dragging her entire world with her. Her chest heaved, her breath coming in ragged bursts, sweat streaming down her swollen face. The fists that once threw punches with authority were now just shields, trembling and porous, barely keeping her upright. Amara didn't rush. She stalked forward, step by deliberate step, eyes never leaving Celeste. Every footfall was a statement, every squeeze of her fist, a warning. When they were close enough to feel each other's breath, Amara leaned in, her voice low and steady, each word slicing through the tension. "You wanted a show, let me give you one." Celeste froze for a fraction of a second. Then the right hook came. It landed like thunder. The sound, sharp, final, wasn't applause or laughter, but the heavy silence of reality collapsing. Celeste crumpled to the canvas like a building brought down in one clean demolition, her arms limp, eyes wide in shock. The phones live streaming from the audience captured every frame, but no one was watching their screens anymore. All eyes were on Celeste the Queen, lying dethroned in the middle of her own stage. Amara stood over her, breathing evenly, gaze locked on the fallen fighter. She didn't celebrate. She didn't raise her fists. The fight wasn't over. But the message was, this was no performance. This was a storm teaching the world what real strength looked like. The referee dropped to one knee beside Celeste and began counting. 1, 2, 3. Each number hit like a nail hammered into the coffin of a legend. The room erupted. Some cheered. Some stared in stunned silence. Phones shot up to record what they all knew instinctively. They'd just witnessed something that would be talked about for years. Amara stood in the center of the ring, still calm, still breathing steady. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She walked to Celeste. When the ref's count ended and the fight was called, Amara didn't celebrate. She offered her hand. She pulled Celeste to her feet. Celeste looked up, her eyes blurred by sweat and defeat. She no longer saw a janitor who snuck into the champion's gym. She saw a warrior. Amara leaned close, her voice steady but quiet enough for only Celeste to hear. This wasn't about breaking you. It's about fixing the mirror you use to see us." There was no gloating, no vengeance, just truth, spoken plainly. Celeste bit her lip, lowering her head. In that moment, she understood this fight had never been about titles or followers. It was about how she and the world saw people like Amara. Amara let go of her hand and stepped back, leaving Celeste to stand on her own. And in the middle of that humiliating loss, Celeste saw Amara clearly for the first time. Not as an intruder, not as a shadow, but as power. The kind of power no belt could give. The kind of power no one could strip away. Just 2 days after the fight, the video of Amara's knockout spread like wildfire. 20 million views in 48 hours. Every punch Amara threw was replayed in slow motion, dissected, narrated, and turned into a hot topic on every social platform. Major sports networks called it one of the most devastating knockouts of a champion in recent memory. But for Celeste, it was more than that. It was a collapse. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but not with messages of support. They were emails from sponsors, terminating contracts, calls from her manager, his voice cold and clipped. "We can't salvage this. They don't want to be associated with this image anymore." Celeste sat on the floor of her dingy rental apartment, her back against a peeling wall. The place had nothing but a broken chair and a cracked mirror, the same mirror she'd looked into every morning before the fight, believing she was untouchable. Now, it reflected a swollen, battered face. She unlocked her phone and scrolled through thousands of comments. That's what happens when privilege meets reality. Queen just got dethroned. Lesson learned for the arrogant. Each line cut deeper than any punch, reminding her of a truth she'd tried so hard to ignore. She was no longer the queen everyone worshipped. Celeste locked her screen and clutched the phone to her chest. Eyes shut tight, not out of exhaustion, but because, for the first time, she had no idea what to do next. Amara's punches still echoed in her head, but worse than the physical pain was knowing how the world now saw her not as a symbol, but as someone who once ruled a throne and was toppled by the very storm she'd dismissed. While Celeste wrestled with her darkest days, Amara Lewis's story became a source of inspiration for millions. The girl with the torn sneakers, once mocked in front of a live audience of millions, now graced the cover of the biggest sports magazine in the country. The press called her Hurricane Lewis, the name that once haunted Kingston's back alley rings, now a global symbol of defiance and survival. At the same time, Amara signed a $2 million contract for her first 3 professional fights. A number that could change her life. And it did, but not in the way people expected. When reporters asked her what she would do first with that money, Amara simply smiled. A week later, she held a press conference. No luxury cars, no flashy new apartment. Instead, she announced the Gloves for Girls project, a gym in Kingston for young girls growing up the way she once did. "No one should have to fight just to have dinner," she said, her voice steady and low. "But if they have to fight, give them a place to learn how to fight with purpose, not out of desperation." The news spread quickly. Brands flocked to her, but Amara was selective. She rejected many endorsement deals simply because they didn't align with her values. In the ring, she was Hurricane the Storm that swept away every trace of contempt. Outside of it, she became a new kind of wind, one that lifted others who had never been allowed to dream big. For Amara, the real victory wasn't in the knockout. It was in turning her pain into a door for others to walk through. And that door had just been opened. Clickbait headlines flooded social media. Janitor knocks out champion. The fight video was chopped into countless edits, slowed down frame by frame, remixed with commentary, or turned into memes mocking Celeste's fall. Sports shows wouldn't stop discussing it, calling the fight a historic moment, a lesson in humility. But for Amara, All that noise was nothing more than a distant echo. She didn't fight to become an icon or a trending topic. This win, for her, was a silent declaration, a way of telling Celeste, the people who laughed at her, and the entire world, no one gets to say who does or doesn't belong, not because of where they came from, the color of their skin, or the rooms they dare to walk into. In a rare interview, when asked what she thought of the viral clips and her new nickname, Amara said simply, "This isn't about me. It's about people like me, people who are looked at but never truly seen. I want them to know silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's how we prepare to speak in a way no one can forget." Those words spread even faster than her knockout. The media coverage shifted no longer just about the fight, but about the message. Op-eds were written on dignity, on how people who'd been underestimated were now standing up to redefine their worth. Amara didn't accept every interview request. She didn't chase every spotlight. She kept training. She kept building gloves for girls. Because for Amara, the real victory wasn't Celeste's fall. It was using that moment to create a voice for those who had never been heard. 3 months later, Madison Square Garden blazed under thousands of lights. The air was thick with anticipation. Every breath from the crowd felt like part of a symphony before the explosion. In the center of the ring, Amara Lewis stood drenched in sweat, breath heavy, but her eyes sharp as the day she first walked into that Manhattan gym. The fight was over. No need for a knockout, no over-the-top celebration. The referee's call rang out. Unanimous decision, and the new lightweight champion of the world. The announcer dragged the words, stretching the moment before it landed. Amara Hurricane Lewis. The arena erupted, foot-stomping, roaring, the name chanted over and over, Hurricane, Hurricane. It was no longer just a nickname from her past, no longer a name tied to back-alley fights for scraps. Now, Hurricane was a world champion. Amara raised the lightweight title belt high, but there was no wild grin, no theatrical roar, only calm. Because for Amara, this wasn't the peak. It was another step in proving that those once dismissed could stand at the very top. The crowd still chanted her name, but Amara didn't hear them all. In her head were other voices, her mother's warning not to let the world turn her into a beast, the mocking laughter from that Manhattan gym, and her own whisper, 3 minutes to survive. Now, those 3 minutes had become a legacy. After the belt ceremony, Amara was led to the press room. Camera flashes exploded. Reporters shouted her name, but she walked slowly, unshaken, as if the chaos around her were just a still painting. She sat at the center table, dozens of microphones leaning toward her every word. A reporter stood. "Amara, do you have any words for Celeste Hart, the opponent who started all of this?" The question froze the room for a moment. Everyone expected a sharp reply, a triumphant jab. Amara lifted her gaze, locking eyes with the reporter. Without hesitation, she said, voice even and soft. "Tell her thank you. Sometimes being underestimated is the best gift life gives you." The room stirred. Some scribbled furiously, some zoomed in on her calm face. No venom, no gloating, just gratitude, simple, but heavy. In that way, Amara redefined victory. It wasn't the punch that put someone down. It wasn't the belt or the millions chanting her name. Victory was being able to look at someone who once belittled you and still say thank you. The clip of her words spread almost as fast as her knockout highlight, paired with footage of Amara lifting the championship belt. But for Amara, this wasn't about going viral. It was a truth she believed sometimes. Being underestimated is the very thing that makes you unstoppable. A sweltering morning in Kingston. Sunlight cut through the old windows of a building transformed into a gym. The walls held black and white photos of legendary fighters, but the centerpiece was a new poster, Amara Lewis, lightweight champion, with bold words beneath gloves for girls. The place had none of Manhattan's polish. It was bare-bone sweat mixed with fresh paint, scuffed wooden floors from their first practices, but for the kids gathered around the ring, it was heaven. Skinny girls, barefoot, wearing hand-me-down shirts, looked at Amara with wide, shining eyes as if they were staring at their own future. Amara stepped into the ring, a pair of bright red gloves in her hands. She stopped in front of the smallest girl, her eyes huge, but burning with the same defiance Amara once carried. Amara knelt, placing the gloves into her hands. Her voice was low, warm, and steady. "Now, it's your turn to rewrite the story." The room went silent. The little girl held the gloves like treasure, her eyes gleaming with something unspoken hope. Amara stood tall, scanning the room. This was no longer a place where punches were traded for meals. This was a place to learn to fight for something greater, for a future, for dignity, for dreams. The frame lingered there, the red gloves in a small pair of hands, Amara standing behind her, sunlight streaming through the window. Silence. But in that silence was the aftershock of a story that had forever changed how people understood strength. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.